Ever wonder why that expensive morning green smoothie makes you feel like an absolute superhero? It's not just the vitamins. A huge chunk of it is the placebo effect. When you invest time and money into a health ritual, your brain rewards you. It instantly drops your stress hormones and pumps out dopamine. Basically, your belief that you're doing something good for your body triggers an actual physical healing. So if a green smoothie can trick your brain into feeling amazing, can the opposite happen? Oh, absolutely. Meet the nocebo effect, the placebo's evil twin. This is what happens when negative expectations literally make you sick. Think about it. Have you ever had a minor cough, Googled the symptoms, and then suddenly felt dizzy and short of breath? Or maybe you read the terrifying warning label on a new supplement, and within hours, you actually developed the exact headache it warned you about. It's not in your head. It's a real physical reaction. Your anxiety triggers your brain to dial up your nervous sensitivity and flood your body with stress hormones. So imagine what happens to your body when you spend your life believing that you are cursed.
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
The idea of curses have existed long before the concept of science as we know it today, or the understanding of germs, or even luck. In the ancient world, if a healthy person suddenly dropped dead, a crop failed, or a freak storm destroyed a village, people didn't look for signs of biology or meteorology. They were convinced that it was interrupted fate. The human brain hates random chaos. It is comforting to believe that bad things happen for a specific reason, rather than by complete accident. If a tragedy befell a community, blaming a curse proved an answer to a terrifying question of why us? It transformed a chaotic, unpredictable world into one dictated by cause, effect, and spiritual justice. In ancient societies, formal legal systems were either non-existent or heavily favored the rich and powerful. Curses became the ultimate weapon for the weak, the poor, and the enslaved. If someone stole your property or harmed your family and the law wouldn't help you, laying a curse was a way to exact cosmic vengeance. It weaponized words and ritual, leveling the playing field against the oppressors who were otherwise untouchable. An excellent example of curses being used as a weapon for the powerless comes from ancient Rome, specifically through artifacts called curse tablets. If a wealthy Roman aristocrat was robbed, they could hire private guards or they could use their political influence to find the thief. But a poor laborer, an enslaved person, or even a servant who had their cloak stolen from the public bath, they had absolutely no legal recourse or police force to help them. So to get justice, they would go to a local scribe or temple, scratch a furious message into a cheap piece of lead, pierce it with a nail to bind the thief, and drop it into sacred water well or a spring. These tablets would frequently say things like, "To the deity, I give this person who stole my cloak. Let them know no sleep and let their health rot until they bring it back to your temple." Historically, humans have deeply believed the concept of magical thinking, the idea that thoughts, words, or symbolic actions could directly affect the physical reality. Across almost every early civilization, words weren't just sounds. They held physical weight and energy. Speaking a malicious wish out loud, writing it down, or performing a ritual was viewed just as dangerous as physically launching a weapon at an enemy. And in almost every early culture, knowing the true name of a person, a demon, or a god gave you physical power over them. If you spoke an enemy's name during a curse ritual, you were effectively grabbing a spiritual hold of their physical body. This is why many ancient people used fake public names and kept their real names a secret to protect themselves from being the target of word magic. Think of Rumpelstiltskin. You had to know his name in order to break free of your contract with him. Also, curses didn't just apply to a person or their body. Think about how you protect your house today. You lock the door, you install a security camera. Maybe you get an alarm system. But what do you do when you lived thousands of years ago and you have no police force and you want some serious valuables protected? You invent a psychological security system. You invent the curse. Historically, the scariest curses weren't actually designed to hurt people. They were history's earliest versions of a no trespassing sign. Royals, priests, and wealthy landowners realized that while a thief might not be afraid of a physical lock that can be smashed with a hammer, they were terrified of the gods. So they would carve hostile little warnings directly into tomb doors or property boundaries. It was the ultimate psychological deadbolt. If a stone inscribed explicit warnings that you should not step inside, or your body will rot and your lineage will be erased, your own superstitious anxiety becomes a security guard that keeps you out. It was a brilliantly practical tool. It kept society in check using nothing but the power of pure fear and expectations. Back in the Middle Ages, books were a major luxury. There was no printing press, so every single book had to be handwritten entirely on animal parchment, which could take a scribe years to finish. They were so rare and so incredibly expensive that a single Bible could cost as much as a small farmhouse. Naturally, libraries had problems with book thieves, but instead of hiring armed guards, the monks came up with the brilliant psychological solution. They invented the book curse. On the very last or the first page of a manuscript, a scribe would write a terrifying warning. A famous example comes from Medieval Library that basically reads, "If anyone steals this book, let it change into a serpent in his hands and rip him apart. Let him be struck with palsy and all his limbs blasted. Let him languish in pain, cry aloud for mercy, and let there be no end to his agony until he sinks into dissolution. Let bookworms gnaw his entrails, and when he finally goes to his judgment, let the flames of hell consume him forever." I mean, talk about extreme, but it actually worked beautifully. A thief might not care about a lock or a guard, but if they truly believed that stealing a book meant their insides would be eaten by worms for forever, they'd think twice before sliding it into their cloak. It was the ultimate invisible security system. And in 1928, John Blymire was a deeply troubled man. His whole life had been plagued by misfortune and superstition of the Pennsylvania Dutch community that he lived in. John's family had moved to Pennsylvania York County area, not too far from an area known as Hex Hollow. In the 1900s, this area was a growing agricultural community with tons of opportunities. Now, growing up, John was sick constantly, headaches that never went away, persistent coughs, just unwell year after year. Now, the thing that is important to note about this area is that it is incredibly superstitious and everyone believes in magic. These communities were comprised of German-speaking immigrants who arrived in America during the 1700s, bringing a deeply unique worldview with them. While they were devoutly Christian, I'm talking Lutheran, Reformed, and later Mennonite and Amish groups, their faith was heavily intertwined with a system of charms, talismans, and sympathy magic. They believed that the spiritual and physical worlds were deeply connected, and that God's power could actively channel to fix everyday problems on the farm. They called this powwow, and it's not the same as indigenous powwow. Practitioners relied on physical books of secrets. The most famous is an 1820 grimoire called The Long Lost Friend by John George Hamann. It is packed with specific spoken spells for everything from stopping wounds from bleeding to curing animal illnesses. Indigenous powwow is a rich communal gathering focused on cultural heritage, social connection, dance, and song. Pennsylvania Dutch brasserie, as powwow was called on the other hand, is a private form of Christian folk magic. A practitioner or powwower uses hand movements to pull illness out of a person's body. They make signs of the cross over organs and recite specific biblical verses or rhyming prayers in German. So, for example, to cure a baby's colic, a healer might gently massage a child's side while reciting, "Colic, colic, go away from my child's ribs," just as Christ grew up and got out of the crib. They're basically prayers weaponized for physical health. And while a brasherer or powwower used white magic and Christian prayers to heal, they believed that they were in this constant spiritual battle against hexeria, which is a German term for black magic, malevolent witchcraft, or active cursing. They believed that an envious neighbor or malicious witch could cast a hex to make a family's cow stop producing milk, causing a perfectly healthy horse to drop dead, or inflict a mysterious wasting illness on a child. Now, John Blymire's family has a long history with this Dutch magic. Both his father, Emmanuel Blymire, and his grandfather were respected local powwow healers, and John also grew up practicing the craft, but his work was overshadowed by his own sickness. As a young child, John fell dangerously ill with a condition called opnemia. In modern medical terms, it is a wasting disease, usually brought on by malnutrition. It's basically when a child starts to drop weight and doesn't grow at normal rates no matter how much they eat. Because Emmanuel is a powwow doctor, he doesn't seek out standard medicine. Instead, he treats John using powwow remedies, one of which is measuring John with a string, and then tying that string through specific ritual gestures and reciting Bible verses to draw the wasting spirit out of his son's bones. When Emmanuel's own blessings don't work, he took young John to another highly powerful local powwow man named Nelson Rehmeyer. And this seemed to do the trick. John starts to get better. That is, up until John is 17. Right up to that point, he is also working as a powwow healer himself. In fact, one night, John and some of his co-workers are leaving work when they come across a rabid dog. John's friends, they don't know what to do. They are terrified. But John, he just walks up to the dog, places his hand on the dog's head, whispers some prayers, and then instantly, the dog stops foaming at the mouth, and from that day on, the dog just sort of follows John around. As it would turn out, John himself was pretty good at powwow. But at 17, John suddenly gets hit with a severe, terrifying illness again. And he didn't just feel physically sick, his mind began to fracture. He was plagued by relentless, blinding headaches, he couldn't sleep for days on end, and he started dropping weight rapidly, almost like a replay of the wasting disease he had as a child. He grows so weak that he loses his job at the local cigar factory and couldn't function. Even his magical powwow seems to be gone. He starts to think that maybe this isn't just a bout of bad luck. Maybe he's cursed or hexed. Then, for a brief moment, it actually looks like John is going to beat his demons. He falls in love with his landlord's daughter, Lily Bell Alloway, and his severe depression starts to lift. They get married, his father-in-law helps him land a steady job at the lumber mill, and his physical health bounces back. He's sleeping, he's putting on weight. Things are finally starting to look up. But then tragedy strikes again. John and Lily have their first child, a little boy, but he dies at just 5 weeks old. Not long after that, they have a second child who is born prematurely and survives for only 3 days. Losing 2 infants in a row would break anyone, but for John, his grief quickly twists back into his lifelong paranoia. He refuses to believe that this is just a tragic random medical misfortune. In his mind, there is only one reason his children are dying and his health is tanking again. The hex is back. Between the crushing grief, his constant terrifying obsessions, and his erratic behavior, his life completely unravels. He loses his job again. He creates an environment of total fear at home, and his father-in-law eventually has him psychologically evaluated and committed at the York County almshouse. Lily ends up leaving him and filing for divorce, leaving John alone, completely broken and entirely consumed by a burning desire to destroy whoever has cursed his family. So, John sets out on a frantic, desperate quest to find out who exactly is behind it. Over several years, John travels across York and Lancashire counties, consulting with more than 20 different powwow doctors and witches. Think about that level of paranoia. He is knocking on the doors of dozens of folk healers, begging them to read his fortune, look into their earth mirrors, and tell them who holds his life force in their hands. But none of them can give him a straight answer. Finally, in the summer of 1928, John's search leads him across the river to the small town of Marietta. this is where he meets a woman named Emma Knopp. In pop culture, she is known as Nellie Knoll, or the River Witch of Marietta. Now, she is well into her 70s. She's small, sharply intelligent, and a formidable reputation in the area as a master of the occult arts. John doesn't go to her once. He goes to her cabin 6 times for these intense sessions. He sits with her week after week, paying her his hard-earned money, desperate for a name. During these sessions, she confirms his worst nightmare. A highly powerful malicious spell has indeed been cast on him. With each session, she feeds him just a bit more information. And then finally, during the 6th and last session, she gives him a name, and John is utterly shocked by who she says. The man who hexed John is none other than Nelson Rehmeyer. At first, John actually defends Nelson. He tells Emma, no, this can't be right. Nelson has always been kind to me. He reminds her that when he was just a little 5-year-old boy, suffering and sickly, Nelson was the one who tried to heal him in the first place. But Emma stands her ground, and she completely convinces John's fractured mind that Nelson's childhood healing was the actual moment that the old man secretly stole John's spirit and locked it away. Emma tells John that there's only one way to break a curse of this magnitude. He has to go to Nelson's house, find the old man's personal copy of the spellbook, The Long Lost Friend, and burn it. And he has to physically cut off a lock of Nelson's hair and bury it 8 feet underground. Armed with Emma's instruction, John finally has a target. His years of searching are over, and his mind is completely made up. He's going to get that hair no matter what it takes. Even though Nelson is an older man, he is massive and powerfully built, well over 6 feet tall and as strong as an ox. John, on the other hand, is frail and wasting away, so he recruits some help. He turns to a 14-year-old boy that he befriends named John Curry. Curry is a lonely teenager from a difficult background, often left alone to his own devices. And John, who is significantly older and struggling with his own mental health and isolation, establishes a connection with Curry based on the shared belief in local folklore. Because John claims to have significant knowledge of powwow traditions and supernatural forces, he positioned himself as a knowledgeable figure that younger Curry was inclined to follow. And Curry believes that not only has Nelson hexed John, but also himself, and his well-being is now also at stake if they don't do something immediately to stop Nelson. On Monday night, November 26, 1928, John Blymire and 14-year-old John Curry officially set out for Nelson Rehmeyer's secluded farmhouse. Now, if you're picturing a dramatic break-in or a tense, aggressive ambush, that's completely not what happened. Instead, the two walk right up to the house and knock on the door like normal visitors. When Nelson answers, John completely loses his nerve. He chickens out. He doesn't demand the spellbook, and he doesn't pull out a pair of scissors to cut the old man's hair. Instead of attacking Rehmeyer, he just plays it cool and pretends that this is a casual social call. They sit down in the kitchen, and they actually end up having a totally normal, calm conversation. It gets so late, and the winter weather outside is getting bad, so Nelson, acting like a hospitable neighbor, actually invites the two men to stay the night and sleep on his floor. And they do. They literally sleep under the roof of the man that they think is a literal witch cursing them and destroying their lives. The next morning, Nelson even cooks them breakfast. Blymire and Curry thank him, they pack up their things, and they walk away without a single violent word or action being exchanged. But as they walk away from the farmhouse, John looks at John Curry and he realizes that they have a major problem. Seeing Nelson up close just reminded John of how physically imposing the old man really was. He realizes that he and a 14-year-old kid stand absolutely no chance of overpowering Nelson to get that lock of hair. They need extra muscle. And that's where Wilbert Hess comes into the picture. Wilbur is an 18-year-old farm boy, and his family is currently going through a living nightmare as well. Over the past few months, the Hess family farm has been hit by a brutal string of back-to-back catastrophes. Their crops were failing, their livestock were mysteriously dying, and members of the family were suddenly falling deeply, inexplicably ill. This family also thinks this isn't just a run of bad luck. They too are convinced that their farm is under the target of a hex. In fact, things have gotten so bad that Wilbert's own mother had gone to consult a powwow doctor to find out who was destroying their livelihood. And that powwow doctor was John Blymire. He tells them, of course, that the family is being hexed, and the man behind their suffering is exactly the same man who is hexing him, Nelson Rehmeyer. John tells Wilbur that the only way to save his family, heal his mother, and break the curse forever is to join them. They need to go back to Nelson's house that very night, pin the old man down, and cut off a lock of his hair. Wilbur is terrified, but his own parents actually encourage him to go, believing that it's the only way to protect their home. Driven by pure desperation and family duty, Wilbur agrees to act as the muscle. The trio is now officially assembled, and on the night of Tuesday, November 27th, Blymire, Curry, and Hess head back out to the dark woods of Hex Hollow for their second visit. And this time, they don't go empty-handed. They come with a bundle of sticks and 25 feet of rope. When they arrive, it's late, dark, and freezing. They knock on the door, and Nelson opens it and recognizes John and Curry from the sleepover. John tells him that he must have dropped some cash the last time that they were over, and they need to look for it. Trusting them, the farmer steps aside and allows all three men into the kitchen. For a few minutes, the three pretend to search the room, but once the door is shut, John turns to Nelson and drops the friendly act, demanding that the old man hand over his copy of the spell book, The Long Lost Friend, and let them cut a lock of his hair. And Nelson flat out refuses. He realizes he's being ambushed and instantly fought back with immense force. The confrontation explodes into a chaotic, violent struggle across the small kitchen. Nelson fiercely defends himself against all three attackers. Recognizing that they're losing control, John tackles the older man, pinning him down and choking him. When Nelson is pinned, the young John Curry grabs a heavy block of firewood from the wood block and strikes him over the head. The blows are fatal, and Nelson Rehmeyer suffers a fractured skull and dies on his kitchen floor right around midnight.
Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you.
Now with Nelson dead, the trio panic. They tear the house apart like a hurricane, completely ripping the place apart. They sprint from room to room, ripping open dresser drawers, dumping clothes onto the floor, pulling down the curtains, smashing furniture. They flip over the mattress, tore up rugs, and emptied the kitchen cupboard, scattering dishes everywhere. They need to find that book. In their minds, the spellbook holds the blueprint of their hexes, and if they don't find it and burn it, then killing Nelson wouldn't even matter. But they can't find it anywhere. They've searched the house from top to bottom, every single square inch of the property, and they find absolutely nothing. Eventually, they realize the sun will be up soon, and they're covered in sweat and blood. Desperate to erase the entire crime scene and hide the body, they abandon the search. They grab a nearby coin purse containing just a few dollars and turn to the kerosene can to burn the entire house down. Maybe if they're lucky, the book will burn inside the house as well. John and the two boys then fled into the freezing night, firmly believing that the entire farmhouse would burn to the ground, erasing the evidence and lifting the hex forever. But that's not what happened, because the house was locked tight. The fire quickly choked of oxygen, so instead of erupting into an inferno, the flames just smoldered out, leaving the house completely intact. For nearly 2 full days, Nelson's body laid completely undisturbed on his kitchen floor. The silence was finally broken on Thursday, November 29th, which happened to be Thanksgiving Day. A neighbor named David Vanover walked onto the property. He hadn't seen Nelson outside, and as he got closer to the barn, he noticed that the animals were making frantic, distressed noise. They hadn't been fed or watered in days. Realizing that something is seriously wrong, Vanover runs to the other neighbor, Oscar, and together they walk up to the house to check on the 60-year-old farmer. They knock, but there's no answer. Looking through the window, they see that the interior of the house is entirely pitch black with heavy soot. They manage to open the door and step inside. They walk straight into a horror scene. The house is cold and smelling of stale smoke, kerosene, and death. The furniture is smashed, mattresses were flipped over from the frantic search of the book, and there on the floor, in the middle of the ruined kitchen, was Nelson's body. He was laying face down, a rope still tied around his neck, surrounded by splattered blood. His body was heavily scorched from the doused kerosene, and the floorboards underneath him were completely blackened by the fire that failed to consume the house. The neighbors immediately sprint to get the authorities, and by the time the York County coroner and county detectives arrive, the news has begun to leak. On the day when families across America are sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner, the police in a rural Pennsylvania town are staring at a crime scene that looks like it belongs in the Salem witch trials. Now, the police are able to track down John Blymire and the boys fairly easy. It doesn't take some master-level detective work because the trio practically caught themselves before the police even knew a crime was committed. You see, earlier that Tuesday night, they had made a massive mistake. Before John and the boys ever walked down to Hex Hollow for that final confrontation, they were trying to figure out if Nelson was even home. To find out, John and Curry actually went to the home of Nelson's estranged wife, Alice. They knocked on her door and asked her where Nelson was staying, or if he had gone home alone. So after finding Nelson's body, the York County detectives immediately begin questioning his family, and Alice just tells the police, well, John Blymire and a young boy named John Curry stopped by my place on Tuesday nights asking exactly where to find Nelson. Basically, giving investigators their prime suspect on a silver platter within hours of finding the crime scene. From the discovery of the body to all 3 men being in handcuffs, it takes the police less than 48 hours. They first pick up 14-year-old John Curry. He is a terrified kid, and Curry completely cracks under questioning. He spills every single detail, confessing to the whole thing, naming John Blymire and Wilbert Hess as his accomplices. When police do pick up John, he doesn't even try to deny it. In his mind, he's not a criminal. He is a victim who has successfully defended himself against a malicious witch. He proudly confesses to the murder, fully believing that the police are going to understand that he just did what he had to break the curse. When the trial opened in January of 1929 at the York County Courthouse, it is instantly an absolute media circus. Reporters from all over the world fled to rural Pennsylvania. The big city newspapers paint the entire local community as backwards, ignorant people who still believe in the dark ages of superstitions and spells. The local authorities are so deeply embarrassed by the witchcraft trial stigma that they push the entire legal process through at lightning speed. The whole thing lasts just 9 days. The defense lawyers tried desperately to argue that these men were legally insane due to their extreme delusional fears of being hexed, but the judge shuts that down, ruling that a deep belief in witchcraft and folk tales does not equal legal insanity. Because the 3 defendants are tried individually, the jury handed down distinct sentences for each of them based on their age and the roles of the crime. As the 32-year-old mastermind who orchestrated the entire plot, John Blymire is convicted of first-degree murder. The jury spared him the death penalty but sentenced him to life in prison. When the verdict is read, John isn't even upset. He calmly told reporters that he thought the sentence was too long, but at least he wasn't bewitched anymore now that Nelson is dead. He served 24 years before being paroled in 1953. Despite being only 14 years old, the jury found John Hess guilty of first-degree murder for striking the fatal blow with the firewood. He is also sentenced to life in prison. This sparks a massive nationwide criticism. Even famous columnists like Will Rogers publicly shames the state of Pennsylvania for locking up a 14-year-old kid for life just because he grew up surrounded by superstitions. Curry ends up serving 10 years, was paroled, and actually went to serve as an artist and cartographer for the U.S. Army during the Second World War. As for Wilbert Hess, the 18-year-old farm boy who acted as the muscle, he receives the lightest punishment. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He's also paroled early after serving his time and quietly returns to civilian life. Incredibly, the Rehmeyer house is still standing in Hex Hollow today, located in York County, Pennsylvania, and has become a legendary landmark for historians and true crime buffs. For decades, the house sat empty, frozen in time, and gathering a reputation as a haunted house. But in the 2000s, Nelson's great-grandson, Ricky, took ownership of the property and decided to preserve it. He cleaned it up and turned it into a living history museum. If you visit it today, it's wild how much of the history is still intact inside those walls. The kitchen floorboards are still heavily tarred and stained black from the kerosene fire that refused to burn down, and the original rope used in the attack is actually on display. The family opened it up to the public for seasonal tours to teach people about the true history of powwow, the reality of the trials, and to clear up the Hollywood myths surrounding the mummy's curse of Hex Hollow. It stands as a literal physical reminder of just how far human superstition can go when panic takes over. And when the international media dragged the region's traditions into the spotlight, they painted the whole Pennsylvania Dutch community as dangerous, backwards, and crazed by medieval superstitions. The public embarrassment was intense. In response, the state authorities launched a massive, aggressive crackdown on local folk magic. They started arresting and prosecuting remaining powwowers for practicing medicine without a license. And because of the heavy social stigma and the very real threat of going to prison, the practice didn't completely die, but it was forced to go underground. Old-school healers stopped talking about their work to outsiders. They downplayed what they did, fearing that they would be labeled as witches or fraudsters. When World War II hit decades later, the push for total assimilation into the modern American culture meant that the younger generations lost touch with the old German dialect, and the oral tradition started fading away. Powwow, though, has never completely vanished. Even today, if you know where to look in central Pennsylvania, there are still traditional healers keeping the practice alive. They treat warts with potatoes, they recite old rhyming prayers, and they pass the secrets down through families. It's just that today, they do it quietly, and nobody is getting driven to murder over it. It is wild to think about how a simple green smoothie, a medieval book curse, and a tragedy in a Pennsylvania farmhouse are all driven by the exact same thing: the raw, untamed power of human belief. Our minds are capable of generating literal physical reality out of nothing but expectations. The brain can be our greatest healer or our most terrifying executioner. Let the magic mean healing to the hopeful, fear to the desperate, and a warning to the curious. Because in the dark woods of human belief, everything is mysteriously connected. Thank you for walking down this crooked path with me. Until next time, I'm Amanda Joy. Follow the path further. If this episode left you lingering in the shadows, there's more to explore. Follow at Down the Crooked Path on TikTok and Instagram for haunting visuals, behind-the-scenes lore, and updates on upcoming episodes. Every post is another breadcrumb deeper into the strange, the forgotten, and the beautifully unsettling. Stay curious and keep walking.